The gate agent's voice carried across the terminal. She told him he had never belonged in that cabin, not for 1 minute, and she said it loud enough that the whole boarding area turned to look. Security arrived within 90 seconds. Marcus Reyes said nothing while they walked him away from the jet bridge, his 6-year-old son's hand still gripped in his. The founding day tribute his father had built the company around was now out of reach. Nobody in that crowd defended him. Nobody knew that the name painted on the tail of that aircraft and the $11 billion airline behind it belonged, in full, to the man they were escorting out of the building. So why did he stay silent? Daniel Reyes built Halcyon Air out of one second-hand freighter and a borrowed strip of tarmac outside Millbrook. When he died, the company was worth more than $11 billion. The will ran 4 pages. Every share went to his son, which was possible because the airline had never gone public and never sold a single share outside the family. There was no press release, no company-wide memo, no photo op. The transfer moved through a private holding entity called Kestrel Holdings, and the name on the public filings belonged to a law firm in Wilmington that had never met a single employee of the airline. Marcus Reyes signed the transfer papers on a Monday morning and drove home to a 2-bedroom rental with a water heater that had been broken for 6 weeks. He was 34. For 11 years before that, he had worked a regional carrier under his mother's maiden name, starting on the ramp, then moving to crew scheduling, then running a small station in Western Pennsylvania, because his father believed a man who inherited an airline should first learn what one felt like from the ground up at 5 in the morning in the rain. The lesson had taken. The habit stayed. He let the executive team run the company. He read every board packet they sent him and answered maybe 1 question in 10. He owned all of it, and he walked through his own airport terminals 2 or 3 times a month without a single gate agent recognizing him. Not by accident, but by design. For a year after his father's death, it had worked exactly the way he wanted. There were reasons beyond preference. His father had spent his final 18 months in and out of hospitals, and in that stretch the leadership floor had learned to run the airline without an owner in the building. Undoing that overnight would have broken things that were still holding together. So Marcus watched the numbers from a distance and told himself a company with strong numbers was being run correctly. It was the one lazy assumption he had allowed himself all year, and it was about to cost him. 5 people knew who he was: the board chairman, the head of internal audit, and 3 outside attorneys. Everyone else in a workforce of 22,000 knew Halcyon Air the way anyone knows a large employer, as a logo, a schedule, and a set of rules handed down from somewhere above them. The tribute was set for 6 o'clock on the first Saturday of October at the original hangar outside Millbrook, marking 1 year since Daniel Reyes had died and, not coincidentally, the airline's 25th anniversary. The plan was simple. Open the hangar doors, a few words from the old maintenance crew, and a bronze plaque with his father's name going up on the east wall, right where the first parts counter used to sit. Marcus had one job that day: be there with his son, Eli, who had never once seen the hangar his grandfather built. He booked the seats himself, from his own laptop, the night before. The nonstop was sold out. The connection through Denver was sold out. What remained was 2A and 2B on Halcyon Air Flight 884 out of Harborview International, departing 7:55 a.m., the last 2 seats on the last flight that could get them there before 6. The fare was steep even by first-class standards. He paid it without a second thought, on a card tied to Kestrel Holdings. He didn't think about it again. He arrived at the airport at 6:40 with Eli's small rolling suitcase in one hand and his own duffel in the other. He wore a faded flannel jacket he'd had since college, jeans, and work boots with a crack across the left sole. Tucked inside the duffel was a folded blazer, a shaving kit, and a small brass compass that had belonged to his father, something he meant to leave beside the plaque. He bought Eli a hot chocolate near a newsstand and watched his own airline move around him. Above the escalators hung a new banner in the company's colors: Distinguished Cabin Assurance, elevating the Halcyon standard. He read it twice. It wasn't language his father would have approved, and he filed it away with 100 other small things he meant to ask about later. Gate 14 filled early. Marcus sat by the window with Eli's suitcase between his boots, watching the ramp crew load bags below. When first-class boarding was called, he took his son's hand and walked to the podium, holding out his phone. The agent's name tag read Renee Castillo. Late 20s, hair in a tight bun. She took the phone the way someone takes something they've already decided is a problem. The scanner chimed green. She looked at the screen, then at him, then at the screen again. "This is a corporate two-way," she said. "That's right. ID, please." He handed over his driver's license. She held it under the counter light, and something close to amusement crossed her face. "Reyes," she said. "Goo, it's my name." "Sure it is." She set the license face down beside the scanner. Behind him, the line had stopped moving. A woman in a blazer checked her watch. Renee typed for a long moment. "The purchasing account on this reservation is Corporate Kestrel Holdings." "That's not the name on your license." "I'm authorized on the account." "That's not what I asked." She kept typing. "Sir, do you have the physical card used for this purchase?" Marcus opened his wallet and set the card on the counter. She glanced at it without touching it. "I need you to step aside while I verify this." He stepped aside, Eli's hand still in his. She waved the next passenger through, then the next, and each one looked at Marcus on the way past, because that is what people do. At 7:24, boarding for the main cabin began. Marcus stood 4 feet from the podium, his son leaning tired against his leg, while 160 passengers filed past onto an aircraft he owned. At 7:34, he stepped forward again. "I have a hard commitment on the other end," he said. "If there's a question about the fare, charge me the difference and put us anywhere on the plane." "Any 2 seats together." Renee finally looked up from her screen. "You'll take any seat," she said, and something in the offer seemed to confirm whatever she'd already decided. "That's interesting. People who actually pay for 2, they don't usually offer to sit in row 30. She said it at full volume, and the sound carried past the podium into the seating area. Heads turned. "I've worked this gate 5 years," she went on. "Every few weeks, someone shows up with a corporate card that isn't theirs and a story about authorization. They always want the good seats, and they always get real reasonable the second I push back. I'm not asking for the good seats. I'm asking to get my son on the plane. You're not getting on this flight." A man near the front lifted his phone low against his chest, angled at the podium. His name was Owen Castellanos, and he was flying to see his mother in Millbrook. He'd watched the last 5 minutes, and something about it had turned his stomach, so he started recording. Renee paged for a supervisor and kept talking while she waited, half to Marcus, half to the gate area, in the flat, cheerful register of someone who believes she's being watched approvingly. "People don't understand what these cabins mean," she said. "There's a standard. You can't just walk up looking like you rolled out of a garage and expect a seat other people work their whole careers to earn." Marcus didn't answer. He looked at the jet bridge door, then at the clock above it, then down at Eli, who had gone very quiet. Paula Whitfield arrived from the operations office, lanyard swinging. Renee met her halfway and spoke in her ear for maybe 10 seconds. Paula looked over at Marcus, the flannel, the boots, the tired kid, and a decision got made about him in under 2 seconds, without a single question asked. "Sir," Paula said, "we're not able to board you today. Can you tell me the actual issue?" "The reservation's been flagged." "Flagged by who?" The scan came up green. "Your own system said green." "Sir, I need you to lower your voice." He had not raised it. Renee, arms crossed behind her supervisor now, said the sentence that would eventually play in front of 4,000 employees and then on every network in the country. "You were never entitled to this cabin. Not today, not ever. People like you don't belong up here, and everybody standing here knows it." The gate area went silent. A man in a windbreaker looked at his shoes. A woman with a rolling bag turned toward the window. Owen Castellanos kept his phone raised and did not stop recording. Paula Whitfield did not correct her employee. She checked her watch, glanced toward the jet bridge, and lifted her radio to call security. The whole exchange settled into the ordinary rhythm of a task being completed on schedule. Marcus Reyes stood in a terminal with his family's name painted across the fuselage outside the window, his son's hand in his, and understood exactly how much power he held in that moment. 3 sentences. That was all it would take. A call to Owen Whitcomb, chairman of his own board, and the woman across the podium would be walked off the property inside 10 minutes. He could be in 2A before the door closed. He could be standing in that hangar at 6 o'clock with a plaque and a compass and the men who had built the first fleet. He thought about it for as long as it took to breathe out. Then he thought about the banner over the escalators, elevating the halcyon standard. He thought about a gate agent who had said what she said, in uniform, at full volume, in front of a supervisor, without once lowering her voice or checking who was listening. A person doing something they know is wrong looks around. She hadn't looked around. She'd said it the way you say a policy, and her supervisor had stood beside her and said nothing. That was the part that stopped him, not the insult, the comfort behind it. Rene Castillo hadn't been afraid of consequences, which meant that inside the company his father built, there weren't any. Which meant this wasn't one agent having a bad morning. It was the temperature of the whole building. And if he ended it with a phone call, he'd fire one employee and learn nothing, and it would happen again next month at a different gate to a father who didn't own the airline. He knelt down to Eli's level. "We're going to take a different flight, buddy. It's okay." Then he stood, picked up both bags, and did not argue when the two officers arrived. He didn't ask for a manager or a complaint form. He walked between them down the length of the gate area, past the seats, past the people who had watched all of it, and said nothing, his son's hand back in his. At the top of the escalator, he turned around once. The jet bridge door was closing. Through the glass, he could see the winglet of the aircraft, his family's name in letters 4 feet high along the fuselage. Owen Castellanos stopped recording, sat down, and saved the file twice because his phone had lost footage before. He wrote a note in his own drafts folder, the date, the gate number, the two names he'd heard, Castillo, and a supervisor whose badge he hadn't been close enough to read. Downstairs, the officer walked him as far as the doors and let him go with a nod that had something apologetic in it. Marcus stepped out into the cold at 7:56 a.m. His phone said the drive to Millbrook was 13 hours. The next available seats on any carrier put them there Sunday afternoon. There was no version of the day that ended with him and Eli standing in that hangar at 6. He called the number for the hangar, and a man named Gus, who'd run the parts counter for 26 years, picked up on the 4th ring. Marcus told him they weren't going to make it. Gus said they'd hold the plaque until he could hang it himself, and that Daniel would have laughed himself sick over an airline that couldn't get his own grandson through security. Marcus said he probably would have. He stood at the curb with Eli asleep against his shoulder and felt something cold and very clear. The feeling he used to get at 5 in the morning in Pennsylvania when a station went dark and someone had to decide what happened next. He opened his phone, scrolled to a contact he'd used exactly twice all year, and typed 4 words, "I need an audit." Sylvia Marsh called back that afternoon from a stairwell at headquarters, because in 20 years of this work, she'd learned stairwells don't have cameras. Marcus gave her the date, the station, the gate, the flight number, 2 names. Then he gave her the only instruction that mattered. Nothing runs through operations. Not one request, not one email that touches that floor. If they find out this is happening, everyone starts behaving, and I learned nothing. She asked what she was looking for. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the point. Don't start with me. Start with everyone this has already happened to." The first thing Sylvia found was that Owen Castellanos had already filed a complaint that same afternoon, video attached, naming Rene Castillo and describing a supervisor he couldn't identify. It was assigned a case number at 4:10 p.m. It was closed at 5:52 p.m. the same day. The closing note read one line, "Guest presentation concern. No service failure identified." The manager who entered it was named Curtis Boyle. The video attachment had never been opened. Sylvia pulled every complaint closed under that code at that station over 2 years, 44 of them. She widened it system-wide and stopped counting past 280. A retired line mechanic pulled from a priority queue at a hub in Ohio and asked twice to prove he'd bought his own ticket. A hospice nurse coming off a night shift, her upgrade processed in error and reversed mid-boarding while the seat stayed empty the whole flight. A father traveling alone with his daughter and a service dog questioned at the podium for 6 minutes and boarded dead last. Different cities, different agents, identical language in every closing note, down to the punctuation. because someone had written a template and every customer experience manager had been using it like a stamp. Sylvia interviewed 9 of those managers under audit authority. Curtis Boyle was the 4th. He didn't deny closing the files. He seemed confused anyone considered a question. "That's the code we're given," he said. "Presentation issue, not a service failure. Service failures move my numbers. Presentation concerns don't." Asked who decided which was which, he said, "The rubric decides. It's not a judgment call." Asked what happened to a manager whose service failure numbers moved the wrong direction, he was quiet a while before answering. "You don't get to that conversation twice." The rubric had a name. Sylvia found it buried in a training package that had never once been shown to the board. Distinguished Cabin Assurance had launched 2.5 years earlier out of the office of Gregory Vance, Executive Vice President of Commercial Strategy. Its stated purpose: protecting the integrity of the premium experience. The mechanism was a scoring sheet. Gate agents assessed boarding passengers on a 5-point scale across attire, demeanor, and travel history before scanning a premium pass. Business dress scored a 5. Work boots and outerwear scored a 2, illustrated with actual photographs. A passenger scoring below threshold triggered enhanced fare verification, the polite name for what Rene Castillo had done at Gate 14 for 29 minutes with a tired 6-year-old standing beside his father. The incentive side of the machine was called Cabin Integrity Index, and it measured verifications initiated and fare irregularities identified, never verifications that came back clean. There was no cost to being wrong and a real quarterly bonus for being right, posted on a leaderboard in every break room in the system. Rene Castillo's file completed the picture. 5 years at the company. 2 years earlier, 4 months after the program launched, she'd been formally counseled by Paula Whitfield for boarding a premium passenger without verification, a man in work clothes whose fare turned out to be entirely legitimate. In the 2 years since, she'd climbed to the top of the Eastern region in Cabin Integrity Index. Her verification volume tripled the station average. Her supervisor's most recent review praising her sharp instincts for protecting the brand. Marcus sat with the file a long time. He wanted to know whether the woman at Gate 14 was one bad employee. She wasn't. She was the best employee the system had trained her to be, measured exactly the way it promised, rewarded exactly as designed. Someone had handed her a scoring sheet with photographs of work boots on it, put a leaderboard on the wall, attached a check to it, and then let her say what she said in a crowded terminal without flinching, because she believed she was executing policy. She was. He called Owen Whitcomb the next morning. The chairman had known Daniel Reyes for 30 years in Marcus since he was a teenager sweeping a hangar floor, and he listened to all of it without interrupting once. "How much of this does Gregory Vance know?" Marcus asked. He wrote it, Whitcomb said. "Presents it to the board every quarter as a revenue protection initiative. Nobody on that board ever asked what verification looks like at a gate. Including me. Including you." The board's annual leadership summit was already scheduled for the second Thursday of November. 4,000 employees filling the main hall at the Harborview Convention Center. Another 18,000 watching a live feed at stations across the system. A dozen credentialed reporters roped off at the back. The evening would close with the naming of the next chief executive. Gregory Vance had been told by 2 board members the job was his. His team's slide deck proposed expanding Distinguished Cabin Assurance to every station in the network by spring. The night opened with a recognition segment. A dozen employees called on stage, ending with the company's highest honor, the Ambassador of the Year award. A crystal trophy, a $10,000 check, a photo with the incoming CEO. Rene Castillo had been nominated by Paula Whitfield and confirmed by a committee that reviewed metrics and had never once met her. Her file showed 5 straight quarters atop a leaderboard. The citation called her the standard we're building toward. She flew in the night before, in first class, on a company voucher. Sylvia's audit finished the Monday before the summit. 206 pages. Its final section, a list of 18 managers and 3 executives, ordered by how many complaints each had closed under a code that hadn't existed before Gregory Vance created it. Whitcomb asked Marcus one question. Did he want the board to handle it privately, the way these things were usually handled? Marcus said no. He said this had happened in public to hundreds of people at podiums and counters in a dozen states. Every one of them made small in front of strangers who said nothing, and that the correction was going to happen in the same place the damage did. Change nothing on the run sheet, he told Whitcomb. Don't warn Gregory. Don't warn the floor. When the recognition segment ends, give me the stage. The hall was full by 8:30 that Thursday morning. The recognition segment ran 40 minutes. Ramp leads, dispatchers, a flight attendant with 30 years and not one missed trip. Applause each time. Renee Castillo was called last. Navy suit, hair pinned back. She took the trophy and thanked her supervisor, her station, the company, said she'd learned real pride in protecting the standard. The room clapped for 6 seconds. Gregory Vance stood at the edge of the stage, applauding with his hands high, where the cameras could catch them, then returned to his front row seat, 20 minutes from being named chief executive. Owen Whitcomb walked out and said that before the board addressed the year ahead, the sole owner of Halcyon Air would like to say a few words. The room made a sound that wasn't quite silence, because 4,000 people shifting at once makes noise. Nobody in that hall had ever heard those words used about a living, breathing person. Ownership had always been a line in a filing, a law firm's name in Wilmington. Marcus Reyes walked out from the wing in the same flannel jacket. He was halfway to the podium before the murmur started at the back of the hall, where someone from customer relations had seen a copy of the video that week, and it rolled forward through the crowd like weather. By the time it reached the front row, Renee Castillo was still holding her trophy with both hands. She stood. She sat back down. Paula Whitfield, 3 seats away, when the color of paper. He set a single folder on the podium and didn't open it. 6 weeks ago, he said, I tried to board Flight 884 at Harborview International with 2 first-class seats I paid for myself, so I could get my son to a family event on time. We were refused at the gate for 29 minutes and escorted out by security in front of about 150 people. I was told I had never belonged in that cabin, and that people like me don't. He nodded once toward the technician at the side of the stage. The screens went black, then to a shaky vertical video shot from row 3 at gate 14. 4,000 people watched it end to end. When Renee Castillo's voice hit the house speakers at full volume, the sound in that hall changed to something Marcus had never heard from a crowd that size. I could have ended it in 10 seconds with a phone call, he said, once the screen went dark. I didn't because I wanted to know if it was one person. It isn't. The screen's filled with the cover page of a 206-page audit, then the number 281, then a training slide showing a pair of work boots scored 2 out of 5. That scoring sheet was written on the 9th floor of our own headquarters and paid for out of a bonus pool. The woman at that gate did exactly what this company trained her to do and rewarded her for doing and put her name on a leaderboard for doing. She's responsible for what she said. She's not the author of it. He looked to the front row. Gregory, you're relieved of your position, effective now. Then, to the other side. Ms. Castillo, your employment with Halcyon Air is terminated as of this morning. Leave the trophy on your seat. He looked out at 4,000 people under a banner that read elevating the Halcyon standard and said the only sentence any of them would repeat that night. My father started this airline believing everyone who walks up to our counter is somebody. We took that and wrote a rubric to sort them. Every one of us in this room has been living off that, including me. The footage was on 3 national broadcasts before the hall emptied. The first wave of coverage was about the humiliation. The second, slower and far more damaging, was about the rubric. 2 rival carriers issued statements within a day confirming they had no comparable program, which put every airline's practices in play. A congressional subcommittee announced hearings on discriminatory treatment in air travel. The Department of Transportation opened a review and requested 3 years of complaint records. Bookings dropped 8% inside 2 weeks. 2 of the airline's 5 largest corporate contracts suspended new bookings pending review, and the rating agency that covered the company's debt put it on negative watch. The first serious meeting happened the following Sunday, blinds down, 14 people around the table. Outside counsel argued the audit had been produced under attorney direction and was therefore privileged. The company had a defensible basis to seal it forever. Communications had a plan built around exactly that. A short statement of regret, 2 departures already handled, 90 days of quiet, and the story would move on, because stories always did. The chief financial officer put a number on the alternative: 281 identified passengers. Most never told the company had confirmed what happened to them. Publishing handed every one of them a documented claim. His estimate ran past $100 million before legal costs. And he said, without any real malice, that no company in the country would choose that on its own. Owen Whitcomb let it all be said, then turned to the end of the table, where Marcus had been quiet for 40 minutes. What kept coming back to him was Curtis Boyle in the transcript, saying he'd closed the file because that was the code he was given, without any sense he'd done something wrong. Boyle hadn't been cruel. He'd been a man inside a system where the ugly thing had a code, and the code made it disappear. Sealing the report was the same move in a nicer room. If we seal it, Marcus said, then the thing I fired Gregory Vance for is the thing we're doing in this room right now. Counsel started to explain the distinction. Marcus let him finish. I hear you. You're right about the exposure, and I'm not pretending the number isn't real. But I spent a year thinking this company was healthy because nobody ever sent me anything that said otherwise. That happened because we built a machine for not sending things. I'm not going to fix that by using the machine one more time. Communications asked what he intended to release. All of it, Marcus said. Every page, unredacted except passenger names. Every code, every closing note, every manager on that list. And we contact all 281 of those people ourselves before any of it goes public because they shouldn't hear it from a broadcast. The board voted the following morning, not because a vote was legally required, since there were no outside shareholders and the decision was already his to make, but because Marcus asked for one anyway. If I hand this down myself, he told Whitcomb, then transparency is my personal preference, and the next owner reverses it in an afternoon. If the board votes for it, it belongs to the company. It carried by 3 votes. The report went out on a Wednesday morning, posted in full on the company's own site. No embargo, no spin. Every passenger in the file had already been called in the 8 days before, told exactly what had been documented, who had closed it, and what the company was prepared to do. Sylvia's team made those calls personally on Marcus's instruction. He made 38 of them himself. The first was to the retired mechanic in Ohio who didn't want money. He wanted to know if anyone had actually read his complaint at the time. Marcus told him the truth. No one had opened it, and it had been closed in under 2 hours by a manager working off a template. The man was quiet a while, then said he'd spent 3 decades around engines and always liked this airline, and that this was the first time anyone from it had spoken to him like a person. Owen Castellanos got a call, too. He hadn't asked for anything, hadn't sold the video, never spoken to a reporter. He was offered a role in a new customer advocacy office and took it. His first act was rewriting the intake form, so a complaint with video attached couldn't be closed until someone had actually watched it. The rebuild took most of a year, and it started with the thing that caused it. Distinguished Cabin Assurance was eliminated entirely the following Monday. Not renamed, not scaled down. The scoring sheets were pulled from every training packet system-wide. The photographs were destroyed. Cabin Integrity Index came out of every gate agent's compensation plan, and the break room leaderboards came down that same week. In half the stations, agents took them down themselves before anyone from headquarters arrived. Verification of a premium pass was reduced to what it always should have been. If the scan came up green, the passenger boarded. Under no circumstance could a passenger's clothing, demeanor, or manner of speaking factor into any boarding decision, a sentence that went into the operations manual as its own numbered section. Every one of the 20,000 employees went through a full day of retraining over the following 8 months, opening with the Gate 14 footage played without commentary, followed by audio from the audit interviews where managers explained in flat professional language how a complaint became a code and a code became nothing. Passengers who'd lived through the rubric sat at the front of a dozen sessions and described what those minutes at a podium had felt like, the retired mechanic from Ohio among them. Of the 18 managers and 3 executives named in the report, 7 were terminated, 6 were demoted out of any customer-facing authority, and 5 kept their jobs because the record showed they'd objected in writing and been overruled. A sweep that punished everyone equally would have taught the workforce that speaking up was the dangerous choice. Paula Whitfield was terminated in the second week of review. Curtis Boyle was moved out of complaint handling into scheduling and volunteered, unprompted, to walk the audit team through every template he'd ever been handed. Gregory Vance sued for wrongful termination and dropped it 4 months later once discovery was scheduled. He never worked in the industry again. Renee Castillo gave one interview about 6 weeks after the summit. She said she'd done exactly what she was trained, paid, and rewarded to do, that she'd been written up once for the opposite and had led her region 5 straight quarters doing precisely what the company measured. She also said, and this was the part that got quoted, that she'd chosen her own words at that gate, and nobody had written them for her. Marcus was asked about it twice and gave the same answer both times. She was accurate on both counts, and he had nothing to add. There was one part of it he never defended and said so once in a room with no cameras. 18 managers had gotten a hearing, a file, a written finding, the right to answer. The 2 people he removed himself on that stage had gotten none of it in front of 4,000 colleagues because he'd been standing there with the audit in his hand and the anger still in him. "I make the same call on Gregory again," he said. "I'm not sure about the other one. A man who tells a company its rules apply to everyone should be careful about the day he suspends them for himself." The recovery, when it came about 10 months later, didn't look like a rebound so much as a different company reading the same instruments. Halcyon Air finished the following year rated first among domestic carriers in customer service, first in complaint resolution, first in employee trust, which Owen Whitcomb said would have meant more to Daniel Reyes than anything else. Voluntary turnover at the stations dropped by nearly a third. Bookings passed their previous peak 14 months after the summit. Every lawsuit settled without a single case reaching a courtroom, for less than the estimate that had been on that conference room table, though Marcus had told the board in writing he'd have paid more. He never became a public figure. He gave no interviews, turned down a magazine cover that would have run under the words the owner nobody knew. The board asked him twice to take the chief executive title himself. He declined both times, and the person they hired had spent 22 years in operations and never once worked from an executive floor. Marcus fixed the water heater himself that spring. He was back at Harborview International on a Thursday in October, almost a year to the day, same flannel jacket, same duffel, Eli's hand in his, holding 2 main cabin boarding passes, the seats he'd actually wanted this time. The banner over the escalators was gone. What hung there now was a schedule board and nothing else, which is what his father had put there in the first place. The agent at Gate 14 was someone new. She scanned his pass, watched the reader chime green, and told them to have a good flight. The whole exchange took 4 seconds and required nothing from him but the pass in his hand. She had no idea who he was. That was the point and the whole of what he'd learned. They flew to Millbrook and drove out to the old hangar, where Gus had the doors open and the light coming across the concrete in a long rectangle. The plaque was up on the east wall, the brass compass resting on the ledge beneath it. Eli ran his fingers along the edge of it, while the 2 men stood there without needing to say much. Gus finally asked why he'd really missed the day the year before. Marcus told him all of it, start to finish, and it took about 15 minutes. Gus listened the way men of his generation listen, without interrupting, without much visible reaction, and when it was over said Daniel would have done the exact same thing, and taken about 4 times as long because the old man never could keep his mouth shut for 29 minutes. They locked the hangar at dark, and the last thing Marcus saw before Gus pulled the door down was the plaque catching the last of the light from the yard. One name on a wall in a building where nobody would ever again need to be told who mattered there. He drove back to the airport for the evening flight, Eli asleep against the window, and somewhere on that road, he finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him with a baggage cart in the rain, years before any of this. Power isn't the ability to tell a room who you are. Anyone with enough money can do that, and the second they do, everyone in the room starts arranging themselves around it, and nothing honest happens again. The real measure is quieter. It's how a person treats the ones who can do nothing for them. The ones standing at a counter in work boots with a tired kid at their side and no way to prove they matter. So never decide what someone is worth from their clothes, their title, or the way they look walking up to you. Respect isn't earned with money or power, and it isn't a reward for being useful. It belongs to everyone, and it should be handed over before you know a single thing about who you're handing it to. The ones who actually have something never need to announce it. What they are is already visible in how they treat the people who can't repay them.